The beauty of what we've built is that we're so close that a patient who may be seeking a second opinion can see the neurosurgeon, the neurologist, the neuro-oncologist, the neuro-ophthalmologist, the head and neck surgeon, and have an MRI all in one day and meet with us at the end of the day and discuss therapeutic options.
This is Out of the Blind Spot. I'm neuro-ophthalmologist Oriafe Adesina. The views and opinions I express in this podcast are purely mine alone. Over the course of my neuro-ophthalmology career, I have had the opportunity to learn from and work with some of the brightest minds in our specialty. While I count myself fortunate to be in this field and work alongside some incredibly talented colleagues, there are a few individuals whose names sort of light up the agenda when I see that they are presenting or serving as a panelist at a meeting. Whether it's an annual symposium, a lecture at AAO, or during personal conversations, these individuals stand out, not only for their wisdom and experience. Their insights are also enriched by the unique perspectives they share through their personalities and storytelling abilities. For me, one of those individuals is Dr. Howard Kraus, and I'm excited to bring you his story. Dr. Kraus is a pioneering surgical neuro-ophthalmologist, specializing in minimally invasive orbital and oculoplastic surgery and adult strabismus. A leader in ophthalmology and medicine, he has blazed the trail for many of us who followed in his footsteps into the specialty as surgeons. In this episode, we'll learn about his formative years, including his journey from rocket scientist to neuro-ophthalmologist. I was awarded 2 semesters of support in the Department of Aeronautics and Astronautics at MIT, where my master's thesis was the development of a fault-tolerant locking mechanism for a proposal for the Space Shuttle guidance computer. We'll learn about some of the individuals who influenced his decision to pursue a career in surgical neuro-ophthalmology. When I started my residency at UCLA, there was a fellow in the neuro-ophthalmology department by the name of Greg Kroll. He said there's one surgical neuro-ophthalmology fellowship at the University of Pittsburgh with Jack Kennardell. We'll also hear about some of the trailblazing techniques and surgical approaches that he has helped to develop, and we'll also find out the aspect of his career that has brought him the deepest joy and fulfillment. I have a natural compulsion and joy in being a teacher. I had a wonderful time speaking with Dr. Kraus about his experiences, and I'm excited to share this conversation with you. This is Out of the Blind Spot, the podcast where we discuss all things neuro-ophthalmology, the specialty of medicine that connects the brain to the eye and to the world for all to see. Today, I have Dr. Howard Kraus joining me to discuss his unique surgical neuro-ophthalmology career and practice. He is one of the founding partners of the Pacific Neuroscience Institute and is the director of the Pacific Eye, Ear, and Skull Base Center in Los Angeles County. Thank you, Dr. Kraus, for joining me, and welcome to Out of the Blind Spot. Thank you, Oriafe. I'm really excited to have this conversation with you today. I'm looking forward to this. As we get started, I'd like to start with asking you about your background, where you're from, where you grew up, and what was your path to becoming a surgical neuro-ophthalmologist? Well, it certainly wasn't a direct path. I grew up in a public housing project in the Bronx, and I discovered in grade school that I had a natural proclivity to mathematics. So the study of medicine or becoming a physician was far from my mind. My dad was very good with his hands and his mind. I was always fixing appliances and radios and TVs and working on the car, and I was his apprentice, so to speak. So with my mathematical mind and my joy of doing things with my hands, by the time I was 12 years old, I was committed to becoming an aerospace engineer. And I recall in high school, my prototypical Jewish mother would say, "Howard, be a doctor." And I would say, "Mom, I love math. I love physics.
I love working through to the end of a problem set and being confident that I have the correct answer. Medicine is not an exact science. I refuse to consider it. So I have a bachelor's degree in electrical engineering from Cooper Union in Manhattan. And I did well enough that I was awarded 2 semesters of support in the Department of Aeronautics and Astronautics at MIT, where my master's thesis was the development of a fault-tolerant locking mechanism for a proposal for the Space Shuttle guidance computer, as avionics was moving from single component reliability to triple fault tolerance. And then I decided to move cross country to Los Angeles and took a job with the Hughes Aircraft Company. The division of Hughes that I was with is now part of Boeing, and our principal competitor in space and communications at the time was a company called TRW, which is now part of Northrop Grumman. And I recall one of my favorite projects was the proposal for the Pioneer Venus mission. And 20 of us were sitting in a conference room at Hughes Aircraft, and we knew that a mirror image, 20 engineers were sitting 2 miles away in a similar conference room at TRW. And I'm proud to say that we won the contract. And I had a rather unique part of that project. NASA had a requirement that 95% or more of the data transmitted from the probes descending through the Venus atmosphere be recovered with a 98% certainty. So the first part of the problem was interpreting what they meant. The second part of the problem was recognizing that there was an unknown duration of blackout of communication as the probes were heating and creating a plasma around them. And I quickly deduced that the only way to meet their requirements was to have simultaneous transmission from the scientific packages as well as recording and retransmission. And a few weeks later, I started medical school, but the Hughes Aircraft Company wasn't done with me. So I continued to field phone calls while I was in med school. And at the age of 24, I didn't have the wisdom to realize that I could have been a highly compensated consultant. So I began at a relatively young age to give away intellectual property. When I started my engineering career, which was only 2 years long, I wasn't quite certain that that's what I wished to do for the remainder of my years on this planet. So I was thinking perhaps of getting a PhD and being an academician, perhaps getting an MBA and being an entrepreneur, or perhaps going to medical school. But as an engineering undergrad, I didn't have biology and organic chemistry as necessary prerequisites. So in the evening, I went to UCLA Extension to take my med school prerequisites. And following working for a year, I took the MCAT and began the application process to medical school, never telling my mother in New York that I was thinking about that. And then about 6 months before I started med school, as I was on the interview circuit, I called my mom and I said, "Hey, Mom, I'm going to be in New York next week." And she said, "Hey, that's great. How come?" And I said, "Well, I'm going on some medical school interviews." And for those of you who know me, it's sometimes difficult to tell whether I'm joking or kidding or serious or not. And the same was true in my relationship with my mother. So she was quite certain that I was pulling her leg until I arrived and indeed went on medical school interviews. By the time I started medical school, I had been married 3 weeks. I needed somebody to support that endeavor. I discovered much too late that it would have been less expensive to take out loans. But this year we celebrated our 50th wedding anniversary, so I think it was a good investment. But at the onset of medical school, my principal interest was in gaining an understanding of the brain. And I thought perhaps I would develop a clinical career in neurosurgery or neurology. But you have to remember that my medical school career was in the previous millennium. And in that era, there were often untoward neurosurgical outcomes. And I'm a upbeat kind of guy who likes to feel rewarded for my endeavor. And the best reward I have is the success and health of my patient. And I didn't think that I could be fulfilled in a career which had a high incidence of negative outcome. And similarly with neurology, I was very impressed with the expertise of my neurology professors in localizing the lesion, but very underwhelmed with the paucity of effective treatments for patients with devastating neurologic disease. So it was in that same era of the first year or two of med school that I discovered that our brain is occupied a great deal with visual processing and eye movement control. Estimates are between 40 to 60% of our brain is involved with our visual system. And I said, aha, my career will be neuro-ophthalmology. And it was really that decision that preceded my choice to choose ophthalmology over neurology. And I believe I chose ophthalmology over neurology, again, going back to the circumstance of liking to fix things. So I was oriented surgically from the outset. But when I started my residency at UCLA, there was a fellow in the neuro-ophthalmology department by the name of Greg Kroll, who subsequently was faculty at University of Albany.
Dr. Gregory Kroll is a surgical neuro-ophthalmologist who completed medical school and residency at Albany Medical Center. He then completed fellowship training in orbital disease and oculoplastic surgery at Moorfields Eye Hospital in London, England, followed by further fellowship training in neuro-ophthalmology at the Stein Eye Institute at UCLA. This is where he met and influenced Dr. Krause to pursue a career in surgical neuro-ophthalmology. He returned to Albany Medical Center, where he was vice chairman of the Department of Ophthalmology from 1982 to 1986, and was named professor of ophthalmology and neurology in 1988. It was at Albany that he also played a formative role in the career of a young trainee named Lenworth Johnson, who went on to become one of the first African-American neuro-ophthalmologists and whose story was featured in a prior podcast episode. Dr. Kroll was the recipient of the American Academy of Ophthalmology Medal of Honor Award for distinguished service in 1985. He has spoken nationally and internationally and has authored over 100 articles in neuro-ophthalmology and orbital disease. He continues to practice surgical neuro-ophthalmology in the Albany, New York area.
And he had just finished a year with Mr. John Wright at the Moorfields Eye Hospital, who at the time was the most renowned orbital surgeon in the world. And Greg said to me, if you're going to choose neuro-ophthalmology, you could consider surgical neuro-ophthalmology, which I had not considered beforehand, in that historically neuro-ophthalmology has been a medical field. He said there's one surgical neuro-ophthalmology fellowship at the University of Pittsburgh with Jack Kennardell. And indeed, that's where I did my fellowship. And it was eye-opening and exciting all at once. I was working with neurosurgeons and head and neck surgeons, and Jack, of course. And even though it was quite a long time ago, Jack Kennardell and Joe Maroon were already beginning to do transorbital intracranial surgery at the time.
Dr. John or Jack Kennardell was a pioneering surgical neuro-ophthalmologist practicing in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. A graduate of Bucknell University, he attended medical school at Temple University and served in the U.S. Navy prior to joining University of Pittsburgh after a short stint in private practice. It was at the University of Pittsburgh where he, along with neurosurgeon John Maroon, developed minimally invasive microsurgical approaches and instrumentation to orbital surgery. Together, they devised surgical approaches to the orbit, taking advantage of the burgeoning field of neuroimaging and the relationship of orbital lesions to the optic nerve and the precise location in relation to orbital and intracranial structures. They, along with a multidisciplinary team of neurosurgeons, ENT specialists, ophthalmologists, neuroradiologists, and pathologists, treated over 1,000 orbital and periorbital tumors in patients referred nationally and internationally. In 1976, Dr. Kennardell began a fellowship program for ophthalmologists and orbital plastic surgeons, and by the time of his retirement in 2010, he had trained almost 40 fellows. Dr. Kennardell was one of the founders of the International Society of Orbital Surgeons, and in 1985 became the chairman of the Department of Ophthalmology at Allegheny General Hospital in Pittsburgh. He received numerous professional awards during his prolific career, including the Senior Honor Award from the American Academy of Ophthalmology in 1997.
Well, that preceded the introduction of neuronavigation and endoscopy, which has made that surgical path much safer and much more efficacious. So early in my career, I was dedicated to surgical neuro-ophthalmology. Following my fellowship, I was convinced that an academic pathway was that which would give me the greatest satisfaction. I didn't merely wish to hone my clinical skills, but I wished to brave new pathways, so to speak. And I interviewed at several locations and was offered several positions and chose to start my career with a position at the University of Texas Southwestern Medical School, where I was Jim McCulley's second hire. He was the new chair at the time.
Mhm.
What I didn't realize was that because he was the new chair and I was the second hire, I would immediately become director of the residency program, director of residency admissions, departmental representative to the faculty senate, that the residents heretofore were taking their basic science at the Stanford course, and I had an obligation to build and bring their basic science training in-house. And I was the chief of neuro-ophthalmology, oculoplastic surgery, and adult strabismus, and building up a referral practice in Tarrant and Dallas County, which, as you might imagine, didn't leave a whole lot of time for research. But Dr. McCulley said to me, Howard, we're a young department. We're just starting out. As more faculty come in, we'll shed some of those responsibilities. Well, more faculty came in and those responsibilities remained the same. And I began to say to myself and reflect, if I'm not going to have the opportunity to do research, what is my purpose in being here? So a year into that position, I came home and said to my wife, let's go back to LA. So after a little bit less than 2 years at Southwestern Medical School, we relocated to Los Angeles. And one of the beauties of my residency training at UCLA is we had not only access to the full-time faculty, but a diverse population of clinical faculty who were ophthalmologists in practice in the community. So I already was familiar with the range of ophthalmology and with the ophthalmologists who practiced in the community, and had confidence that I would have no difficulty building up a referral practice. Actually, when I spoke with my former director of ophthalmology at UCLA, Dr. Brad Stratzma, he offered me a position at UCLA, but having experienced what I call a rapid burnout at Southwestern, I said to Dr. Stratzma, I'm going to start my own practice, but I will be your most active volunteer faculty member. And indeed, in the first few years of my practice, I was attending neuro-ophthalmology clinic twice per month on site at UCLA at Jules Stein, twice per month at the Veterans Hospital, once per month at the County Hospital at Harvard UCLA. And I was also assisting residents in surgery. So at one point, I think I was doing as much or more clinical teaching in the clinic and in the OR as any of the full-time faculty. And it was through that clinical teaching that I met a lot of physicians who are today our colleagues. I met Lynn Gordon when she was in her residency, and I believe that Lynn chose a path of neuro-ophthalmology in part because of my influence. And indeed, when she did her neuro-ophthalmology fellowship, it was 50% with Bob Hepler at UCLA and 50% in my practice for surgical neuro-ophthalmology. And Lynn then practiced with me for 5 years before she chose to go back to UCLA full-time. So one of the benefits of teaching is that you have an opportunity to mentor. And over the years, I've discovered that one of my favorite activities, apart from assisting patients in regaining their health and their vision, is the joy of teaching and the interaction with the mentee and the student. Indeed, when my 40-year-old daughter was entering second grade, my wife and I wondered if she was at the right school. And I said, Cheryl, we may not be able to determine that unless we're in the classroom. So when she was in second grade, every Tuesday morning, I was a volunteer parent in the second grade classroom, initially starting out with small groups of kids, and ultimately the teacher trusted me well enough to give class lessons. And I reflect that that Tuesday morning was the favorite part of my week. So I have a natural compulsion and joy in being a teacher, and my career has certainly afforded that to me. Joining the volunteer faculty at UCLA also opened up the contacts that I then made with neuroradiology and neurosurgery and head and neck surgery. So within a couple of years of joining the UCLA voluntary faculty, I also obtained an appointment in neurosurgery. And in the late 1980s, was a co-founder of the UCLA skull-base surgery program, and then went on to be a co-founder of the North American Skull-Base Society, which is the international organization principally occupied by neurosurgeons and head and neck surgeons, but also others who have to deal with complex tumors and problems at the base of the skull, which prior to the 1980s was a no person's territory. The risks and hazards were too extreme to venture into the cavernous sinus or in other regions of the skull base. So my activities at Southwestern and then again at UCLA helped me hone my skull base experience. And then with the introduction of endoscopy, I became an early adopter of endoscopy and neuronavigation with my neurosurgical colleagues and with my head and neck colleagues, such that in the 1990s, we were doing transnasal endoscopic orbital decompressions for thyroid eye disease. In 2001, my ENT colleagues and I were the first to do transnasal endoscopic orbital tumor resection. And over the last 5 to 6 years, my neurosurgical colleagues and I have been exploring new pathways of doing transorbital craniotomies for disease in the middle cranial fossa and the cavernous sinus. So despite the fact that I have not been a full-time academic, I've remained engaged in teaching and in research to some degree, and really have built a very satisfying career. Although my career has been very satisfying and fulfilling for me, that's not to say that every neuro-ophthalmologist should be a surgical neuro-ophthalmologist. But I also know from spending time with medical students and residents that some people are quick to reject neuro-ophthalmology as a potential pathway because they view it as a non-surgical specialty. And I must say, it definitely is not a non-surgical specialty. You can make of it, what you wish.
Oh, most definitely. That was a wonderful and inspiring story. You literally were a rocket scientist before you became a physician. So which is harder, rocket science or being a physician, being a neuro-ophthalmologist?
I often say the easiest part of what we do in our careers is taking care of patients. And sometimes I say that rocket science and brain surgery are easier than dealing with Epic. So many of the things that are thrown against us and at us in terms of prior authorizations and playing a game of Mother May I to take care of our patients are far more difficult than rocket science and brain surgery.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. A couple questions about your background. You were an engineer before you became a physician. Number one, what made you want to become a physician? And number two, what do you think your engineering background gave you or in your career as a physician? How has it helped you as a doctor?
If we are fortunate, we discover things about ourselves as we go along day by day and year by year, and we alter our pathway. And I feel very fortunate that exactly what I'm doing today has given me the greatest satisfaction. And if I may say so, I feel is my destiny. And I had the good fortune of finding the right pathway. I reflect that when I was in junior high school, I enjoyed writing at the time. And 2 of my poems and a short story were published in the junior high yearbook, which I had forgotten. And when my wife was going about her quarterly purges of my belongings, held up my yearbook and said, "You don't need this any longer, do you?" So I reopened it and I discovered a short story I had written about two brothers on a bicycle built for two out on a fall day. And as you read along, you discover that the younger brother in the back is blind. And in the course of events, they have a tumble on the bicycle and he has a spontaneous recovery of vision. And you learn that when he was 3 years old, he was alone in the car with his mother and watched her pass away before his eyes. So here I was at the age of 12, already determined to be an aerospace engineer, choosing to write a short story about non-organic blindness.
Mm.
So I think the neuro-ophthalmologist was always there, and that I'm lucky that the neuro-ophthalmologist found his way to the surface. In terms of engineering versus medicine, although I was rather matter of fact and rejecting a consideration of medicine, I realized that I derived great pleasure from helping people, great pleasure from teaching, great pleasure from saving vision, saving lives, helping people achieve better health and well-being. Even if I can simply find a better refraction in the right prism for someone, that can be as satisfying as removing a complex tumor if I've, enhanced their daily activities and their life and their well-being. And that's something that takes time to discover in terms of what makes you tick. And regarding the blend of engineering and medicine, I often say to my patients, the good news and bad news is your physician is an engineer. And they look at me quizzically and I say, well, it's good news because I'm adept at figuring out problems and fixing them. But you'd also have to deal with my engineering personality. And I must say, having grown up as an engineer, so to speak, there is a higher incidence of engineers and mathematicians and physicists being on that which today we refer to as the autism spectrum disorder. And I recognize some of that in myself. Ironically, when I met my wife, she was a grade school teacher pursuing a master's in education in the evening. And she did psychometric testing on me when we were engaged, despite which she went through with the wedding. So she recognized my shortcomings as an engineer, perhaps before I did. But on the other hand, if I think about my multidisciplinary work, my desire to apply instrumentation developed by others for other purposes to ophthalmology and neuro-ophthalmology, my discovery of new surgical pathways, which may be safer and more effective, I think it all springs from my engineering mind. At one time, and probably up until the early 70s when I was applying to medical school, there was a rather rigid accepted pathway to becoming a physician. You had to be pre-med and you had to be committed to medicine since you were a toddler. And even in my own interviews in the 70s, I met resistance from some interviewers who would say to me, you already have a career. You're leaving that career. Why should we take a chance on you? How do we know that you'll be committed to medicine or that you'll, take what we give you and choose to do something else? But today in medicine, I think that many medical schools, if not all, are actually looking for a diverse background in their medical student population. And I think when we take in English majors, history majors, and art majors, that we're adding to the diversity of the population of physicians and adding to cross-pollination and our ability to improve medicine overall, not only in terms of its science, but in terms of its ethics and morality and the application and distribution of healthcare services. So perhaps I'm chauvinistic having started out as an engineer, but my observation has been that a diversity of background enriches the practice of medicine.
Couldn't agree more. I think that story really emphasizes and demonstrates what diversity of background and thought and experience can do. As you explained, what you've done in medicine and the technology and the advances that have come through, what you've done to apply them to surgical practice. Before I forget, congratulations to you and your wife on your anniversary. 50 years is a wonderful accomplishment, and she stuck with you for that psychometric analysis.
Right. Right. I often say when people ask me that the key to success of a long-term marriage or a long-term relationship is mutual tolerance. And my wife is a very tolerant person. The other thing that I don't want to neglect, and perhaps I should highlight a bit in terms of a career in medicine, is I've always been one who gets his hands dirty, so to speak, in terms of being somewhat of a healthcare activist, not only in terms of the well-being of our patients, but the well-being of our medical community. So I was a student leader. I became a medical association leader. I'm a past president of the LA County Medical Association, past president of the California Society of Eye Physicians and Surgeons. I spent 8 years serving on the Medical Board of California. I'm an examiner and a mentor examiner for the American Board of Ophthalmology. I've been active in Nanos, although I have served on committees. I haven't moved up the leadership ladder at Nanos because I've been committed in other ways. So I think that each of us who develop a career in medicine have much to give in terms of protecting medicine, not just for ourselves, but for the well-being of our patients. And I often observe that the physician-patient relationship in the previous century involved two people, perhaps three when the nurse came in the room. And nowadays, when I'm in the exam room with my patient, I strongly feel that there are 32 other people in there with me. People from the insurance company, from Medicare, from the regulator's office, the prior authorization people, the pharmacy benefit people. And while I understand how all of those people got there, it reflects back on my earlier statement that the easiest thing we do is take care of our patients. But rather than throw up our hands in frustration, I've endeavored, and I encourage all physicians to endeavor to make things better. And one of the ways to make things better is to work with your professional association, whether it be Nanos or your local medical association, to become proactive and to introduce yourself through your organization to other community leaders, to hospital leaders, to legislators, to try to prevent more bad things from happening, and at the same time to try to allow better things to happen. So in my own opinion, that's a very strong part of building your healthcare career, to be a activist for your patient and patients in general, and for that activism, including protecting and enhancing the profession and our delivery system of healthcare.
Thanks for that. Really great advice. And it segues a little bit into my next line of questioning. You have had leadership experiences within medicine, within ophthalmology. You are a founding partner of your current practice. Can you talk about how you started this practice and how that's evolved over the years? And, what leadership lessons you've learned from that experience?
Since medical school, I've been a multidisciplinary person, so to speak. I've reached out to those who are in fields that relate to our practice. And in neuro-ophthalmology, it's really, everything. But very close relationships with neurosurgeons and neurologists and head and neck surgeons and interventional neuroradiologists and neuro-oncologists and so on. And in my teaching and my participation at UCLA and having been a founding member of the UCLA Skull-Base Surgery Program, again, the multidisciplinary nature came to the forefront. And one of the founding principles of our having put together the North American Skull-Base Society is that we felt that if multiple disciplines can come together in the clinic and in the operating room and work together, we can accomplish better things for our patients. In terms of the Pacific Neuroscience Institute, there were frustrations that some of us were finding in the university setting. One would think that the university ultimately has the best open atmosphere for communication and interaction, but every facet of human life has political undertones and overtones. And a few of us who became frustrated at not being able to accomplish all that we wished to accomplish in the university setting considered coming together and building something outside the university. So there were four of us who founded the Pacific Neuroscience Institute, which now has 40 physicians. And the four of us were Dr. Dan Kelly, who's a neurosurgeon, Dr. Jessica Griffiths, who's a head and neck surgeon, Dr. Santosh Kesari, who's a neuro-oncologist. Dr. Kesari was chief of neuro-oncology at UC San Diego before he joined us. Dr. Kelly, I first met in 1993 when he was recruited by UCLA to lead their pituitary tumor program. Dr. Griffiths, I've collaborated with since 1990. So when you have a core of exceptional people and you have experience in working with them, it's exciting then to expand that into something bigger. So at the Pacific Neuroscience Institute, there are a couple of things that allowed us to flourish. One is we had the good fortune of being sought after as a partner with a few different healthcare organizations. And we had the opportunity to pick and choose, and we chose to sign a professional services agreement with Providence Healthcare, which has 6 hospitals in Los Angeles County and 5 hospitals in Orange County. We started at St. John's Hospital in Santa Monica as our flagship hospital, but we've rapidly expanded into their other hospitals as needs arose. So today we have 8 neurosurgeons, 2 neuro-ophthalmologists, 1 optometrist, 5 neuro-oncologists, 6 interventional neuroradiologists. We have interventional neuroradiologic services available at 4 hospitals. And in fact, our interventional neuroradiology program is doing more acute stroke care in Los Angeles County than UCLA or Cedars, and has the top door-to-device time in the county right now. We've got 5 subspecialty neurologists with specialties in Alzheimer's and myasthenia and Parkinson's and multiple sclerosis. We've got 3 psychiatrists. We have a psychedelic therapeutic research program. We have 40 different clinical trials in progress right now amongst our physician group. So we have flourished in what we call a private-demic environment. At least 50% of our doctors came to us directly out of university positions because they liked what we were doing collaboratively. And the other half are certainly university caliber physicians, but came more directly out of fellowship into our program. So it's been exciting. We started the Pacific Neuroscience Institute, the 4 of us, in 2015. We signed the professional services agreement with Providence Healthcare in 2017. And we've been very successful. So it's nice to build things. As an engineer and a physician, building the Pacific Neuroscience Institute has been one of the greatest satisfactions of my career.
It seems like it's a really holistic approach to neuroscience care with the scope of specialists that you have working with you, from psychologists to optometrists, neuro-ophthalmologists, neurosurgeons.
The beauty of what we've built is that we're so close that a patient who may be seeking a second opinion can see the neurosurgeon, the neurologist, the neuro-oncologist, the neuro-ophthalmologist, the head and neck surgeon, and have an MRI all in one day and meet with us at the end of the day and discuss therapeutic options.
It's really, really fantastic. I want to pivot back to your surgical neuro-ophthalmology practice, the uniqueness of it coming out of your training, and how over the years it's grown and evolved into what you're doing today. When you trained in Pittsburgh, it's my understanding or thought that surgical neuro-ophthalmology was in its infancy. Would that be an accurate statement to make, number one? And number two, what was your experience like training with Jack Canada, who was one of the first surgical neuro-ophthalmologists in the country?
I had an incredible base. Having done my residency at UCLA at Jules Stein, where there wasn't necessarily a fellow available all the time, I had the opportunity to do many things in residency. I learned adjustable suture strabismus surgery from Art Rosenbaum. I learned oculoplastic surgery from Henry Bayless, Norm Shore, and other luminaries. So I had a great surgical background even before I began my fellowship. Indeed, I'm the one who taught Jack Kennedale how to do adjustable strabismus surgery.
Well,
So it's nice when a fellow has an opportunity to teach his or her mentor. And Jack left a terrific impression on me, not only because of his thinking and his skill and his enthusiasm, but because he was a real caring individual. And as you go through life and you think of all of your professors and all of your teachers and all that you've learned, you can probably count on one hand those mentors and teachers whom you felt a close connection with, whom you felt really cared about you and cared about your career development and were there for you. And Jack was one of those people for me. I found it to be very warm and encouraging. And then being in the operating room with him was an incredible experience. And even a more incredible experience was the rapid trust that he developed in his fellows as he observed them. So Jack wasn't always in the operating room with me. You learn more when you do more. And certainly when you're doing a multidisciplinary surgery with your head and neck colleagues or your neurosurgical colleagues, you're learning from them at the same time as well. So what can I say? I was in the right place at the right time and very, very fortunate along the way. We always have our backup plans. So the other thought I had I not been accepted into Jack's fellowship, is perhaps I would have considered doing 1 year of clinical neuro-ophthalmology and another year of oculoplastics. And many of our surgical neuro-ophthalmologists have done just that. They've done 2 or 3 different fellowships. But having an opportunity to do a fellowship with someone who is doing exactly what you wish to do, I think gives you a head start. But certainly there are lots of ways and lots of orientations within surgical neuro-ophthalmology. Some of our best adult strabismus surgeons are neuro-ophthalmologists. Some of our best oculoplastic surgeons are neuro-ophthalmologists. One of the things I do worry about in terms of career development is that I see many residents choosing career pathways that they view as more lucrative. So, for example, when I'm with the neurosurgery residents, I'm a little bit discouraged to see that the majority of today's neurosurgery residents are becoming spine surgeons, and a large number of ophthalmology residents are going into oculoplastics or refractive surgery or retinal surgery. So I had the misfortune of not being so wise and choosing a career based on what I thought would be really fun to do and really exciting to do. But on the other hand, I'm not so bad off, and I don't regret that I'm not living in a bigger house and don't have a more expensive car. But I do wish we had a system whereby there would be a better distribution of specialists in our healthcare system, rather than a system which is so much driven by economics.
No, I agree. And how do you think we can work towards that with your experience?
There are many things wrong with United States healthcare, but I don't know that we have an opportunity to make it as we feel it would be best. We certainly have an opportunity to continue to nudge and push our legislators in the right direction. But, in U.S. politics, it's influenced by lobbyists, and the lobbyists are as influential as the size of the bags of money they come with. And although physicians have an opportunity to lobby, we may not be as influential as Big Pharma. We may not be as influential as the hospital association. We may not be as influential as the for-profit health insurance companies. But for the most part, the physicians and physician organizations have the right message. And I'd like to think that so long as we are always out there for the betterment and protection of our patients, then it's hard to say that we're wrong. So my experience, fortunately, has been that my physician colleagues and I go to the legislature not to improve our lives, but to improve the lives and well-being of the people. And I think that gives us an edge when it comes to fighting abusive laws or restrictive laws that impair our ability to take care of our patients. So I forget which film it was, perhaps Galaxy Quest, that said, never surrender. And to a large degree, in advocating for the well-being of our patients, we have to be advocates in society and advocates in the legislature as well. I don't know that we'll ever have the best healthcare system. In many ways, we have a better healthcare system than in many nations. Some of the patients that I've operated on have come to see me from other nations because some of the surgeries that I do aren't available in their nation. So it's good to have a national health service. It's good to have healthcare available for everyone. But I don't think that there's any society that has everything in healthcare. I spent 2 months at the Moorfields Eye Hospital between fellowship and my academic career, and spent those 2 months with Mr. Wright at the Moorfields Eye Hospital, and observed that he spent 2 or 3 days a week in the National Health Service and 2 or 3 days a week in his private office on Harley Street. And the quality of care was the same in both locations. So to have a system wherein the society supports a National Health Service, but at the same time doesn't make it unlawful to provide private care, I think to some degree is an ideal system, so that a basic level of care is available to everyone, and society pays as much as it can afford to support that level of care. But for those who have the ability to pay for more, rather than to leave their nation, they may be able to find that in their own nation. But the British system is not the ideal either, because it doesn't have adequate access to the uniformity of care that they have. But interestingly, the more uniform access is and the more uniform care is, it seems to be the happier the society is. Mm. And that is to say that as people, we're always looking to see what our neighbor has. And if everybody is doing very well, but there are some people who are doing better, then we worry about inequity. So whether it be in healthcare or housing or other services, there are always this yin and this yang and this balance between providing for all and providing for some. And that affects our healthcare system as well. So I don't have all the answers, but basically I'm an advocate for the well-being of people individually and as a society. If I had the authority, I would provide more for everyone, but no one's given me that authority yet.
Well, it seems like the philosophy of putting people first, you can't really go wrong with when you're making that your priority. So what is your favorite thing about what you currently do from a clinical and surgical standpoint?
So whether I'm giving them a pair of prism spectacles or removing a cancer, if I know that I've helped that person, I have great satisfaction. And then second on the list, I think, is teaching. I derive a great deal of personal satisfaction from teaching, whether it be a medical student, a resident, another physician, or one of my grandchildren. I love teaching and I love helping people.
What advice would you give to young neuro-ophthalmologists or people aspiring to be neuro-ophthalmologists coming through their training about what you do and about finding what their passion is in neuro-ophthalmology?
So you have to plan a practical career. I once thought early in my training that I'd like to live on a remote island. And I realized that if I chose to live on a remote island, I probably wouldn't have very much of a neuro-ophthalmology practice. So choosing where to live, choosing who you will live with, choosing what you will do in your personal life and your family life, I think has to be a very important factor. If you take what you feel to be the best possible job, but it's in the worst possible place, you'll be miserable. And if you're miserable, you will not flourish. But part of choosing a career path has to be a balance of needs. Today's young person has been following the mantra to a large degree of the work-life balance. And I think that one of the things I've been most guilty of is not having what others might view as a proper work-life balance. I do spend time with my family and just had a lovely holiday weekend with children and grandchildren. but I still have 12 to 14-hour days in the clinic, not with patients, but before patients reviewing Epic charts and after patients completing Epic charts and planning for meetings and planning for teaching. And I'm always accessible to my patients. I'm always available on weekends, even if I'm out of state or out of the country. I'm always available by text, by email, by phone. And perhaps my work life has been imbalanced. But on the other hand, I still know my family and I know everybody's name and everybody's birthday. And I have derived tremendous satisfaction from my career. But that's not the right pathway for everyone. So each individual has the good fortune or misfortune of having to find their own pathway.
So I'm gonna ask you the same question a little bit differently. Looking back over your own career and your own experiences, and if you could go back to a young Howard Krause, some point, early in your training before you differentiated, what advice would you give your younger self, knowing what you know now?
I realized that I have gained something from everything I've done. And I don't think I would change a thing. I might choose to be born into a wealthier family, but in terms of the opportunities that presented themselves to me and the pathways I chose, I have no regrets. I think everything I've done has contributed to everything I do.
Awesome. As we wrap up our conversation, do you have any final thoughts or any final words of wisdom you want to leave with our audience, our listeners?
Spend time with friends and family, spend time with colleagues, and don't be shy. If you see a senior resident or a fellow or a senior faculty member who's doing something that intrigues you or that you would like to learn more from, don't hesitate to reach out. You may find that that senior person whom you thought was unapproachable was just waiting for somebody to ask a question. And as I think about those things that have most enriched my career development, it's really been my relationships with teachers and mentors. So find the right teacher, find the right mentor, and recognize that you yourself will benefit when you become a teacher and a mentor.
Sage advice to live by and a great way to wrap up our conversation. Howard, I want to thank you for joining me. This has been a wonderful conversation. It's amazing to learn about your experiences and glean some wisdom from the career you've had and path you've blazed in search of a ophthalmologist. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you very much.
I want to thank Dr. Krause for speaking with me and sharing his experiences. In our wide-ranging discussion, we covered rocket science and ophthalmology, healthcare, and patient advocacy. His perspective, shaped by his wealth of experiences, is inspiring. So long as we're always out there for the betterment and protection of our patients, then it's hard to say that we're wrong. That's our episode for today.